France is considering expanding its nuclear umbrella. Mass protests are erupting over government-perceived attacks on science. China is making bold economic moves at its annual parliamentary meeting, and a new global power bloc is forming against the West. I am Mandatory Fun Day. This is Worldwide Wednesday. Here's everything you need to know in a couple minutes. Today we're breaking down these major geopolitical shifts, explaining what they mean and why you should care. Let's dive in. But before we do that, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I want to hear your thoughts. Your engagement keeps the channel running, and I appreciate it. France's nuclear umbrella expansion. This is pretty critical as far as world events go. Imagine a future where Europe no longer depends on the United States for nuclear protection. That future might be closer than you think. French President Emmanuel Macron just hinted at something that could reshape global security, expanding France's nuclear deterrent to cover European allies. Since the Cold War, Europe has relied on NATO, with the U.S. acting as the main nuclear shield. But with what is perceived as Washington's growing reluctance to fund European security, Macron is making it clear Europe needs to prepare for the worst. This move isn't just about defense, it's about power. If France extends its nuclear protection, it cements itself as the dominant military force in Europe. This could put it at odds with Germany, which has long pushed for a more unified European defense, but lacks nuclear weapons of their own. And let's not forget the elephant in the room, Russia. If France's nuclear deterrent expands, will Putin see it as an escalation? And how will the U.S. react to Europe seeking independence from its nuclear umbrella? One thing is clear, this isn't just a political statement. It's a shift that could redefine European security for decades. I appreciate all the support y'all give me. The likes, the comments, the subscribes, it's amazing. If you want to support me further, you can go over to themandatoryfunday.com and buy some merch. Website members are going to get exclusive content that relates to this very video, and they also get 20% off forever on every order they make. Scientists protesting across the US and France. Why is it happening? Scientists aren't usually the ones out marching in the streets, but something has pushed them to their breaking point. The Stand Up for Science 2025 rallies erupted in over 30 U.S. cities and across France as scientists and their supporters took to the streets to fight back against drastic policy changes. As always, I need to put a disclaimer in here. I'm an active duty service member. I'm not making a comment on whether the things that are happening within our government are good or bad. I just want to report the things that are happening and maybe even give you a little bit of my assessment where I believe that it's appropriate. But let's get back to it. Let's get right back into the action. So what's causing this? Grant freezes are a big issue. The US and French governments have slashed funding for key research areas, especially in climate science and medical research. For those of you that don't know, when you have an investor, they want to recoup their investment fast. World governments, and specifically the US government, is one of the only investors where you can promise them a return 5, even 10 or more years later down the road, and they'll continue to fund you, right? The United States government is able to do that just based on the sheer amount of money that it takes in, and it can think long-term in that way because there's not a for-profit business to run. And so this is a very big change, a very big alteration into how we do things. And so that is part of the reason why it's as significant as it is. Another reason is political interference, or at least perceived political interference. There's growing concern that political leaders are firing scientists or pressuring them to alter findings. Additionally, public health impacts are a concern. Experts warn that restricting science funding could set back disease research and environmental protection for decades. If we slash funding for these things, are we going to be able to make the progress that we need to prior to the next maybe COVID outbreak? This isn't just a niche issue. It has major global consequences. Cutting funding means fewer breakthroughs in medicine, AI, and energy. And if countries like China continue to heavily invest in science while the West pulls back, the global balance of power could shift in these areas. The bigger question, though, is do you guys like how much I talk with my hands? Does it bother you? I'm just kidding. The bigger question, is this just the beginning of a larger war on science, or will these protests force governments to reconsider? Are our governments, specifically the US and French governments, going to continue to slash funding? A lot of this stuff takes time. Scientific research takes time. And so it could be potentially years before we see any legitimate repercussions for this. Again, I'm not making comment on whether this is good or bad. I'm just reporting what's happening. But it would make one apprehensive. right? We're not necessarily going to see any negative outcomes from this immediately. It could take a long time. China just held its National People's Congress meeting. I'm going to tell you why that meeting's important. Don't you worry. When China's National People's Congress meets, the world listens. Why? Because this is where China sets its economic goals, military spending, and global strategy for the year. In the exclusive content I have for this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about China. But I will say right up front that the Chinese government views time a lot differently than the US government does. In the US, we measure things like, for example, quarterly. But the Chinese government will look at things over the course of years or even decades. This year, the focus is on three big areas. Economic stability. China is trying to maintain growth despite global economic headwinds. Military expansion. More money is going into defense, particularly naval forces, and tech dominance is the third. China is doubling down on AI, semiconductors, and space exploration. China has tried for years to conduct a military modernization effort. It has been trying desperately to modernize its military for a very long time. They've had some level of success. They have, all right? But they haven't had the level of success that they want, and that is partially due to the level of corruption that is in all throughout the Chinese government. Just as an example, recently, somebody in the Chinese government found out that they had water in the nukes instead of fuel. And if you guys don't know, rockets don't travel on water. They need stuff that goes boom. I actually have another video on it, so here's a shameless plug. Go watch that video, please. I worked really hard on it. But what's one of the most important takeaways? China is shifting its economy away from reliance on exports and focusing on internal consumption. That means less dependency on Western markets and more economic power at home. And then there's the military angle. With rising tensions in Taiwan and the South China Sea, expect China's increased defense spending to make waves, quite literally, if they're making waves for the boats. We're okay with touching China's boats. China's message is clear. It's not just playing defense. It's preparing for a future where it leads. The world better be ready. And finally, the rise of an anti-U.S. bloc. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are the frontrunners for this. What happens when four of America's biggest adversaries form an alliance? We're about to find out. This isn't just an informal friendship. These countries are actively working together on military cooperation, economic deals, and strategies to weaken U.S. influence. They want to bring us down. They want to bring the United States of America down.
Let's have some fun. Let's get crazy here.
So who are the key players? Russia, providing military experience and energy exports. China is the economic powerhouse financing much of the operation. Iran is bringing regional influence and oil supply. And North Korea is providing the wild card, providing unpredictable nuclear threats. I mean, we kind of can predict them because they just come all the time. It's not unpredictable if it's just always happening. What does this mean for the U.S. and its allies, though? A new Cold War, increased cyber attacks, proxy conflicts? I mean, we'll have to wait and see. One thing is certain, though, these nations see a shifting global order and they're making moves to challenge the West. Whether the U.S. and its allies are prepared is another question entirely. I'm going to go into that in further detail, again, in the exclusive content that you guys can have for this video if you become a member of my website. The world isn't just changing, it's accelerating. Nuclear alliances, scientific protests, economic power plays, and geopolitical shifts are setting the stage for a new era of global conflict and cooperation. But what do you think? Is the world heading for another Cold War, or are these just growing pains? You know, is this just normal? Is this something that we've experienced all throughout history? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and truly, I do read the comments. I really enjoy seeing them, so please let me know what your thoughts are. Did you like that?